Tell me why you started Semperis 10 years ago.
Got it. I thought you were going to ask me about HIP.
I'll get there.
Yeah, for sure. So Semperis started basically because several things came together. I had a professional services company, and we were doing consultancy for multiple different organizations. Most of those were large enterprises. And one of those was a telco company. And one day, the telco company, their AD went down. And what it meant for the organization is that the entire company couldn't do anything. No billing, no invoicing, nothing. The telco itself continued to provide the telecommunication services because that was a separate networking system. But outside of that, they were completely under the water. And we got engaged there, Microsoft got engaged there, and it took us, I think, like more than a day to bring the system back up, which by itself was already a nightmare. But once it came up and we were happy and we were high-fiving, we'll go home, and I think like 6 hours later, we got a call to come back.
Oh no.
The exact same thing again. This time it wanted to be faster because it's just did the whole thing, so we kind of knew what we were doing. But what struck me at the time was how easy it is, because we realized afterwards what caused it, or who, I should probably say. And but what struck me, this is 2012 time frame, and but this realization that AD resilience is not what I thought until that point. Because there was always this assumption, that AD have application inside of it, so it will be resilient, so it's all good. So that was kind of one thing that happened. And then the second thing that happened is that through the consultancy company, we got engaged with one of the financial institutions that as part of their VCP plan, they wanted to do a test of what it will take to recover their AD if that went to go down. And I think we spent 5 days with the Microsoft engineer on site. And we just said, look, we will eventually bring it back up. But 5 days, the bank is down. Is it acceptable? And the answer was obviously not. So that to me was kind of like the aha moment, saying, well, on one hand, all of my customers, I know Gartner says like 90% of the organizations out there using AD. For me, it was 100%. There was not a single company that I worked with on the consulting side that did not have AD. So all of them have AD. None of them had a really decent disaster recovery plan, because there was always this assumption that AD will be always up and running. And we didn't really predict the future. Like I couldn't tell you that in 2014, I thought that ransomware is about to become a thing. But it just struck me really weird that something which is so critical to so many organizations doesn't have a disaster recovery plan, or not an easy one. There was a white paper still is of like 100 pages year, right? So that was kind of the starting point. And then from there, it's also a bit funny to think how things evolved, because I didn't know much about startups. I didn't know, I came from professional services world, basically. And what happened over time is that customers starting to push us into certain directions. The first thing that they said, okay, it's great that you can help me with the recovery of AD, but how do I detect who's doing what in my environment? How do I respond to those? And if it's 10,000 changes that happen for which I'm not going to revert the entire forest, what do I do about those situations? So that kind of created the next offering from Semperis, what we refer to today as the during the attack stage. And then we had customers coming and saying, well, you're already helping with the post-breach, you're helping with the during the attack, but what about the pre-attack? Can you help me to prevent things from going wrong? And that's basically how the Semperis pre-attack offering came to be. And then customers starting to expand into the cloud, Azure AD, now called Enter AD. So we started to expand with them as well, basically the same pre, during, and post across. We realized that hybrid environments actually introduce new, different type of challenges that did not exist only in the cloud or only on-prem. The combination became very interesting in terms of the attack surface and what it actually means. So that's kind of how we got to where we are today.
That's really interesting. And I mean, this is a hybrid identity protection company, but you guys protect much more than just identity.
Right. So you mean how identity protection conference, and they asked me this morning to explain why did we create a HIP, why a conference that is focused on the hybrid identity protection. And I turned to the audience and I asked them, how many of you here have a cloud-only environment? Now you have several hundreds of people downstairs, right? And out of hundreds of people, one raised his hand. And I asked, how many of you have an on-prem only environment? So maybe you had like 5 people raising their hands, which means that the other 95 or whatever percent, much more than 95, are all hybrid. And that to me was kind of an understanding of, hey, the world is hybrid and the world will remain hybrid for, I don't want to say forever, but for a very long period of time. And I don't know what's next thing is going to look like, but it's quite obvious that at the very least you will have something in your own data center, which might be maybe running on the cloud, but it's still, the situation is that you control more than just what data goes into the application. So if you're running a virtual machine on AWS or in Azure, to me, it's still part of the data center. There will be a lot of SaaS usage as well, where you actually use just the application. So you only have the data that you input in and some configuration. And many companies are actually going multi-cloud as well. So there's always going to be some sort of mix of different identities, different permission structure, different authorization models. And what we're striving to help with is basically across all of that. Now, this is a journey. This is not overnight type of thing. So we started by saying, look, if eventually a company have something on-prem and that something relies on AD, and then they expand to the cloud, they adopt cloud applications, those rely on Enter ID and on Okta. At the very least, before you even touch any of the cloud applications, I need to understand what is happening inside of the identity stores. I need to understand how changing something in one identity store will impact the other identity store, because those are being synchronized, and what it might mean for the organization. This is where we are today. Next step for us is obviously to use that information to what I call the identity-driven cyber resilience. So basically, you leverage this understanding of identity and you expand into the SaaS applications to start and protect those as well.
Okay, great. Give me a second. I want to make sure this is still running. Just blink. Yeah, you're okay. Okay, good. I think we're still going. Yes, we are. All right, terrific. Now that's interesting because so you're not providing direct identity protection. You're not competing with, say, Okta or CyberArk. You're kind of there in the background.
Yeah. So Okta and CyberArk, although there are some similarity, to me they're very different offerings. Okta, to some degree, is an identity cloud provider, so like an identity store eventually, as opposed to CrowdStrike, which is more of a privileged access management or privileged identity management, PAM. I know that Okta have some of those as well, but no, we actually have an offering to protect Okta as an example. So I mentioned AD and Enter ID because that's where I think where the majority of the market is. But we also have an offering that allows you to scan your Okta environment, see where you have exposures, vulnerabilities. There is a very, I think at this stage you might say, the very known tool from Semperis, although people don't always make the connection, a tool called Purple Knight. Purple Knight have been used by about 30,000 different organizations at this point. And that one actually, and we don't charge for it, it's a community tool. It's not an open source, it's a freeware. And what it allows you to do is to scan your AD environment as a one-time thing, to scan your Enter ID environment, to scan your Okta environment, and to get a view across all of those. So from my perspective, you have the directory stores, be it AD, Enter ID, or Okta. You need to protect those. You need to make sure that they are resilient, and you need to make sure that you close all the gaps that the adversaries will try to use against your environment. That's what Purple Knight can help you with.
Fantastic. And that's a great resource for anyone to use, as long as they're using AD.
AD or Enter ID. We have customers that use only for Enter ID or only for Okta. We've seen some of those as well now. Because those environments actually tend to be even more complicated. It's incredible what's happening here.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
I was wondering. I thought the pipes were acting up.
No?
Oh my. Okay. All right. Where do you see the sort of future of like AD protection and intro protection going?
That's a great question. I think that we will to some degree there's a lot of different things here. The first one, there's thing that just showed up called AI. It didn't just show up, I'm kidding. It's been around for a very long period of time, but it's starting to be more and more precise. And I think the automation use cases that we're seeing now, both for the defenders, but also for the bad guys, are starting to become more sophisticated. And they're starting to use it both sides in much better ways. So I think we will get to a point where a lot of the things that today are done manually, either by the bad guy, either by the good guys, hopefully by the good guys, will become much more automated. So you will have usage of machine learning to detect attacks, to stop attacks, maybe even to prevent some of the attacks. So that's kind of one thing that I envision happening. I think that the state of the hybrid environments will remain the same way pretty much as it is now for, I don't know, at least the next 5 years, probably way longer than that. And I think that the next big challenge and that people are going to deal with is the authorization. So what I mean by that is that if you think about it, you might argue that the authentication via Okta, via Entra, being the multiple other providers, it's kind of been solved. There is always needs to prove more MFA, better MFA, but passkeys, but eventually it's solved for most of it.
Yeah.
The authorization we're going to have a challenge, because I shared it earlier on stage here today, but I've heard from several different CISOs now this same scenario. You have Salesforce, you integrate it with DocuSign, because you want the salespeople to start the process directly from Salesforce. Somebody misunderstood the permission structure that you have in Salesforce compared to the permission structure in DocuSign. Long story short, you end up having salespeople that can see everything inside of the DocuSign repository, which is not great. And just today, in one of the presentations, they mentioned that only Entra have 100 and over 100 different roles just inside of Entra. Then you have something similar in Okta, then you have something similar in Salesforce. Then just imagine, and it's not the same terminology, it's not the same. So somebody or something, I think, will need to kind of come on top and say, okay, if you're trying to do this, then that's how the solution will work.
Yeah. It's sort of a similar situation with, cloud service providers, each having different ways of doing things, and you can't transport like Azure was to the Amazon was.
Right.
You have to learn each one separately.
Yeah.
That's a good idea, having an AI that can kind of do it for you. Save a lot.
AI and machine learning will obviously be a tool that you use to create this, but something will need to come on top of it, and I hope that Semperis will play a big role in it, in basically smoothing out and making much more secure and resilient decisions when it comes to the authorization of it.
Sort of like a universal rule manager.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there anything else about the talk about?
Yes, one thing that I think that you mentioned before we started the recording, is the report that came out of the Five Eyes, which I think is a very if you are in the AD security space in any shape or form, go read that report right now.
Right.
If you haven't already. I know that many already did. And the reason that I'm so excited about the report, you have all of a sudden CISA, NSA, the Australian equivalent, the Canadian equivalent, and some others, all coming together in the same look. In 9 out of 10 attacks that we're seeing, AD is going to be a target, or to some degree, it's a target to get to the next level.
Right.
And AD have been around for over 20 years, have plenty of misconfigurations that can be abused and will be abused by the bad actors. So make sure that you close the gaps.
Yeah.
And what they did in the report, which I think is extremely helpful, they mapped out 17 different attacks that they are most commonly seen going against the AD. And they basically urge the organizations and the defenders, go and do something about it now, don't wait. And I think the report makes a ton of sense. That's also what we are seeing in the field. Semperis is one of the things that I think are quite unique about us, is that in addition to the product arm, we have a services arm. And as part of the services arm, we can help customers with breach preparedness and incident response. So we're being brought into real incidents. So we're seeing, that's actually how we build the product. We see what is happening during the attack stage. We see what the adversary are doing, how the bad guys are trying to go against the environment. We help the customer to fight it off, to get the information into operational stage, and then that knowledge makes itself way back into the product. But what we saw in that report are things that we've seen in the field as well. So the attacks that they're recommending, things that they're saying the most, completely agree. That's what we're seeing.
So in a way, what the 5 Ops report is doing is kind of creating like an OWASP top 10, well, it's top 17 in this case. But
Yeah.
it's a checklist.
It's a baseline. Now, some of the attacks there is actually, it's not like one thing. Some of the attacks can be broken down to several different stages. If you want to map it into the MITRE as an example. But yeah, they're a great initial baseline.
That's great. Excellent.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you.